In a case that shocked Virginia and the nation, 3-year-old Khaleesi Cuthriel disappeared in early 2021 under disturbing and tragic circumstances. Her disappearance wasn't reported until September of that year, months too late to save her from the horrors she endured. The story of Khaleesi's short life and death is a tragic example of a child lost in the cracks of a broken system. What began as a hopeful arrangement between a struggling mother and a trusted friend ended in a nightmare of abuse, neglect, and ultimately, murder. This is the tragic story of Khaleesi Cuthriel, a little girl whose life ended far too soon. Khaleesi was born to Amanda G. Airy, a young mother from Waynesboro, Virginia. In late 2020, Amanda found herself in a difficult situation. She was incarcerated at the Middle River Regional Jail for a parole violation and needed someone to care for her daughter while she served her time. Amanda turned to someone she trusted, Candy Jo Royer, a woman she believed would care for Khaleesi as if she were her own child. In October 2020, Amanda placed Khaleesi in Royer's care. She had no reason to suspect that this decision would seal her daughter's fate. But by February 2021, something went terribly wrong. In August 2021, Candy Jo Royer and her boyfriend, Travis Brown, went on the run. Brown was already a fugitive, wanted in 5 different jurisdictions for a long list of crimes, including strangulation, grand larceny, and assault and battery. On September 3, 2021, Royer was officially reported missing. It was believed that she was traveling with Brown and that the pair had embarked on a crime spree across Virginia and Pennsylvania. What no one realized at the time was that Khaleesi had vanished months earlier. While still incarcerated, Amanda Airy learned that Royer was missing. She immediately alerted jail authorities that Royer had her daughter. Amanda hadn't heard from Royer or Brown in months, and she was growing increasingly worried about Khaleesi's safety. Initially, she was told that Khaleesi had been placed with the child's maternal grandmother or aunt in Covington, Virginia. But Amanda quickly discovered that this was a lie. No one knew where Khaleesi was. On September 12, 2021, police tracked down Royer and Brown in Pennsylvania. The couple had driven there in a stolen car and were hiding out in a motel. But when they were arrested, Khaleesi wasn't with them. At first, Royer and Brown claimed that social workers from Shenandoah Valley Social Services had taken Khaleesi. This was quickly proven false. Shenandoah Valley Social Services confirmed that they had no record of taking custody of the little girl. Then the story took a darker turn. Brown eventually admitted that Khaleesi was dead. According to his account, the child had accidentally struck her head, and he had wrapped her body in a blanket and thrown it in the trash. But the evidence pointed to a much more sinister story. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered horrific evidence of abuse. A video from January 2021 showed Khaleesi bruised, frail, and unable to stand. Still photos taken around the same time showed cuts and bruises on her face. At Brown's home, police found Khaleesi's blood on the upstairs door frames. Even more chilling, they discovered a bent wire hanger wrapped in electrical tape with Khaleesi's hair trapped inside. This was not a case of accidental death. It was torture. Brown made bizarre and disturbing claims to police, alleging that the 3-year-old was suicidal and sexually aware. Statements that experts have dismissed as nonsensical in an attempt to justify his abusive behavior. In truth, Khaleesi had been subjected to unimaginable suffering. In May 2022, both Royer and Brown were indicted for Khaleesi's murder. Each faced charges of aggravated murder, felony murder, conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, and conspiracy to conceal a dead body, among other offenses. The trials began in 2023. Travis Brown's defense team tried to shift the blame onto Royer, painting her as the primary abuser. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. In August 2023, Brown was convicted of aggravated murder, felony murder, and child abuse. At his trial, an expert in child abuse testified that Khaleesi's treatment fit the definition of child torture. 2 weeks after Brown's conviction, Royer pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. In exchange for her guilty plea, the other charges against her were dropped. Both Royer and Brown await sentencing. Khaleesi's body has never been found. Investigators believe her remains were discarded in a landfill a vast area that would take years to search thoroughly. Despite extensive efforts to locate her, the little girl's final resting place remains a mystery. What is known, however, is that Khaleesi endured horrific abuse at the hands of those who were supposed to protect her. She was just 3 years old, a vulnerable child who deserved love and care, but instead faced unimaginable cruelty. The tragic story of Khaleesi Cuthriel has sparked outrage and calls for reform in Virginia's child welfare system. Many have questioned how Royer and Brown were able to evade authorities for so long, and why Khaleesi's disappearance wasn't reported sooner. Amanda Airy, Khaleesi's mother, remains haunted by her daughter's death. She trusted Royer to care for Khaleesi in her absence, a decision that she will regret for the rest of her life. "She was my baby," Amanda said in a tearful statement. "I never thought this would happen." Anyone with information that could help locate Khaleesi Cuthriel's remains is urged to contact the Waynesboro Police Department or the Virginia State Police. Rebecca Christ was last seen walking along West Beverly Street in Staunton, Virginia, on a mild spring afternoon in 1988. It was May 3rd, just after lunchtime, when she received a phone call at her apartment. The conversation was brief. Rebecca told her sister she needed to step out for a few minutes and asked her to watch her 2-year-old son. Her parting words must have sounded routine, but those moments marked the last time anyone saw her alive. Rebecca never returned home. She left behind everything she valued: her young son, her wallet, and a life that, though modest, seemed peaceful and full of promise. More than 3 decades later, her disappearance remains one of Virginia's most perplexing unsolved cases. Rebecca was 22 years old when she vanished. Described as quiet and kind-hearted, she was well-liked by those who knew her. She lived in a modest apartment on West Beverly Street with her son and sister, relying on public assistance to make ends meet. Rebecca had dropped out of high school and didn't own a car or even a driver's license, but she was resourceful and responsible. Her sister recalls that Rebecca was deeply interested in police work. She kept a police scanner at home and had a scrapbook filled with clippings about local law enforcement. Despite the challenges she faced, Rebecca remained a devoted mother. Her sister insists she wouldn't have left her child willingly. In fact, the day before her disappearance, Rebecca had paid her rent a month in advance, a sign that she was planning for the future, not running away from it. The first eerie clue in Rebecca's disappearance came the night she vanished. Around midnight, the phone in her apartment rang. Rebecca's mother answered, but the caller didn't speak. They simply hung up. Who made that call? And why? The answers remain unknown. Rebecca's family officially reported her missing on May 7th, for days after she was last seen. Investigators initially believed she may have left voluntarily, but as time went on, that theory made less and less sense. Rebecca had no history of reckless behavior, no known enemies, and no reason to abandon her son. 3 years after she disappeared, in 1991, a local handyman sent a shocking letter to Rebecca's family. In the letter, he confessed to accidentally killing Rebecca and disposing of her body in a landfill. Authorities investigated his claims, but they were never able to verify his story. Despite this, the man remains a suspect in the case. He is currently serving time in prison on unrelated charges. Rebecca's case took another bizarre turn just a few months after she went missing, when a neighbor of hers, Raymond Fauber, also vanished. Fauber was a retired postal worker who lived in the 300 block of Fayette Street, not far from Rebecca's apartment. In 1991, the same year the handyman confessed to Rebecca's alleged murder, Fauber's body was discovered in the basement of his home. He had been shot by his son-in-law, Robert Asbury, who was later sentenced to 45 years in prison for the crime. During the investigation at Fauber's property, cadaver dogs picked up a scent at the end of the paved driveway, leading police to suspect there might be another body buried there. However, authorities ultimately decided not to conduct a search. While the circumstances surrounding Fauber's murder were unsettling, police do not believe his death is connected to Rebecca's disappearance. They noted that the driveway had been paved several years before she vanished, and Asbury, despite being offered a plea deal that would have spared him additional prison time, denied any involvement in Rebecca's case. One detail that has fueled speculation about Rebecca's disappearance is that she was due to appear in court the day after she went missing. The hearing was related to a paternity case involving her son. Did the upcoming court date play a role in her disappearance? Did someone connected to the case want her silenced? Rebecca's family has long wondered whether the phone call she received before she left the apartment was related to the hearing. Was it a friend offering support? Or was it someone with more sinister intentions? Investigators have not ruled out foul play, but without concrete evidence, the mystery remains open-ended. At the time of her disappearance, Rebecca Christ was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Her sister described her as a homebody who didn't drink, smoke, or associate with people who did. She loved her son and was determined to provide him with a stable life, despite the challenges she faced. Rebecca's case is especially heartbreaking because of the life she left behind. A young child who grew up without his mother, parents who died without ever learning what happened to their daughter, and a sister who continues to seek answers. For years, investigators have hoped that someone might come forward with new information. Perhaps the person who made that midnight phone call knows more than they've said. Or maybe the handyman's confession holds more truth than authorities could confirm. Rebecca's disappearance has spawned numerous theories. Some believe she was the victim of a crime of passion, possibly connected to the paternity case. Others think she may have been lured out of her apartment under false pretenses and met with foul play. There's also the possibility that Rebecca crossed paths with someone dangerous that day, someone who saw an opportunity to harm a vulnerable young woman. Despite the passage of time, her loved ones haven't given up hope. Her son, now an adult, continues to live with the shadow of his mother's disappearance. Her sister remains determined to keep Rebecca's memory alive and to find the truth about what happened that day in May 1988. Samantha Clark was last seen in the small town of Orange, Virginia, just after midnight on September 13, 2010. That night, she told her younger brother that she was leaving the house for a while and would return in the morning. She left their home on Lindsay Drive, carrying only her house key. But Samantha never came back, and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Her family didn't report her missing until 2 days later, assuming at first that she had simply stayed out longer than expected. However, as more time passed with no contact, their concerns turned into a deep, lingering fear. Samantha, who had just graduated from Orange County High School 3 months earlier, didn't have a cell phone or driver's license, making it unusual for her to simply vanish without telling anyone where she was going. Her family was well aware that she had left home once before, staying in a nearby town for 2 weeks, but even then, she kept in touch with her family every day. This time, there was only silence. Investigators quickly began looking into Samantha's connections, hoping to find clues about her disappearance. One name that came up was Randy Allen Taylor. Samantha knew Taylor, and phone records showed that they had spoken on the day she went missing. Taylor's name would later make national headlines when, in August 2013, he was charged with abducting 17-year-old Alexis Murphy, who had disappeared that month after visiting a gas station in Livingston, Virginia. The case against Taylor quickly escalated when, in January 2014, he was charged with first-degree murder in Alexis's case, even though her body hadn't been found. In May 2014, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. It wasn't until 7 years after Alexis disappeared that her remains were finally discovered in December 2020 in a remote area of Livingston. In February 2021, forensic testing confirmed the remains belonged to Alexis Murphy. Despite Taylor's connection to Samantha, he has never been charged in her case. The timeline is troubling. He spoke to Samantha on the day she disappeared, and just 3 years later, he abducted and murdered another teenage girl in the same general area. Authorities have not ruled out his involvement, but without more evidence, the case remains open and unresolved. Taylor continues to deny any involvement in either case beyond admitting to meeting Alexis Murphy before her disappearance. The circumstances of Samantha Clark's disappearance remain a mystery. Friends and family describe her as a caring and responsible young woman, not the type to leave without warning or cut off contact with her loved ones. Her disappearance is considered suspicious, and although there is no concrete evidence of foul play, the lack of communication from Samantha is deeply out of character. Over the years, her case has received sporadic attention, especially after Taylor's conviction in Alexis Murphy's case, but no major breakthroughs have been made. For Samantha's family, the pain of not knowing what happened to her has only deepened over time. They continue to hold out hope for answers, but with each passing year, the mystery becomes more difficult to solve. Was Samantha another victim of a predator lurking in Central Virginia? Did she leave with someone she trusted, only for the encounter to turn tragic? Or did she meet a fate completely unrelated to Randy Allen Taylor? These questions remain unanswered. And more than a decade later, Samantha Clark's disappearance remains one of Virginia's enduring unsolved mysteries. Rex Casper was a gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps in 1995, a man known for his dedication to his job, his family, and his outdoor hobbies. On the morning of May 19, 1995, he was last seen dropping his daughter off at Sherwood Forest Elementary School in Norfolk, Virginia. Casper was expected to report for duty at 9 a.m. that morning, but he never arrived. He didn't return home either, and from that day forward, he vanished without a trace. 11 days after his disappearance, on May 30th, his 1986 Ford van was found abandoned in Norfolk. The van was unlocked, with the keys still in the ignition, and his wallet was sitting open on the back seat, displaying a photograph of his family. His driver's license and long-distance calling card were also found in the vehicle, but his military identification card was conspicuously missing. Investigators noted that the ashtray in the van was filled with cigarette butts, an unusual sight since Casper wasn't known to smoke heavily and typically kept his vehicle immaculately clean. Sand was scattered across the driver's side floor, which was also uncharacteristic of him. The scene seemed off, and authorities later concluded that it appeared staged, though no immediate evidence pointed to who might have done it or why. The mystery deepened when it was discovered that Casper's ATM card had been used around 9 a.m. on the day he disappeared. One transaction request was denied due to insufficient funds, but in another, less than $20 was withdrawn. In the days leading up to his disappearance, there were a series of unusual withdrawals and transfers from his account, totaling around $600, all of which came from travel advances Casper had received for work-related trips. However, he hadn't taken any of those trips before he disappeared. His ATM card has not been used since May 19th. At the time of his disappearance, Casper was married to his second wife, though their relationship was troubled. There were rumors and allegations of infidelity on Casper's part, and the tension in his personal life was no secret. His wife, struggling with the emotional strain of his disappearance and their rocky marriage, attempted suicide shortly afterward. Despite their problems, she insisted that Rex would never willingly abandon his children, whom he was deeply devoted to. She eventually had him declared legally dead. Casper's background adds another layer to the mystery. He was originally from Rigby, Idaho, and only 6 months away from retirement when he vanished. A skilled auto mechanic with a reputation for being good at his job, he was also known for being private about his personal life. Outside of work, he had a passion for the outdoors, especially mountains and forested areas, where he found peace and joy. Those who knew him believed his love of nature made him resilient, someone who wouldn't easily get lost or injured in the wilderness. His disappearance baffled both his loved ones and investigators, as there were no clear indications of foul play, yet the circumstances surrounding his van and bank account activity suggested otherwise. His family and friends continue to seek answers, hoping for some resolution to a case that remains open and unsolved after nearly 3 decades. In 2005, Dwayne Chick lived with his father, Virgil Chick, in Rustburg, Virginia, where they shared a quiet life. On the afternoon of July 22nd, around 4 p.m., Dwayne left their home with a woman he had recently met online. He never returned, His father grew concerned, but Dwayne had a history of disappearing for a few days at a time. So at first, Virgil hoped he would eventually show up. However, when days passed without any word from his son, Virgil's concern deepened. 3 days later, on July 25th, Dwayne was arrested at 9 a.m. for public intoxication and shoplifting. He was taken to the Rustbogue jail on Courthouse Lane, where he was processed and held until his release at 7 p.m. that evening. That was the last confirmed sighting of Dwayne Chick. After he walked out of the jail that evening, he vanished, and no one has seen or heard from him since. As days turned into weeks without any sign of Dwayne, Virgil grew increasingly worried. He reached out to the woman Dwayne had been with on July 22nd, hoping she could provide some answers. She told him they had gotten into an argument and that Dwayne had left her house afterward. She claimed not to know where he had gone. The revelation offered little comfort and only added to the mystery of his whereabouts. Adding to Virgil's anxiety was the fact that Dwayne had been going through a rough patch in his life. He had recently lost both his job and his driver's license, significant setbacks that left him feeling frustrated and aimless. After Dwayne disappeared, Virgil found his son's diary. And it were troubling entries that revealed Dwayne was struggling with his mental health and feeling like his life was spiraling out of control. His words painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by despair, hinting at inner turmoil that Virgil hadn't fully understood before. Despite these insights, the circumstances of Dwayne's disappearance remain unclear. There is no solid evidence of foul play, nor is there any indication that he left voluntarily with a plan to start a new life. His father believes that while Dwayne had left home for short periods before, something was different this time. He had never been gone this long without any form of contact. Investigators have been unable to find any significant leads in Dwayne's case, and over time, it has grown colder. His disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. David Blockett was just 2 months old when he was abducted from his family's residence on 13th Street in Newport News, Virginia, on December 11, 1980. His abduction remains one of the most baffling missing person cases in Virginia history, leaving a family shattered and desperate for answers for more than 4 decades. That morning, a woman who called herself Marie Kelly knocked on the door of David's mother, Vanessa Blockett. The woman claimed she was a social worker with the State Department of Social Services and that the agency was sponsoring a holiday event for children at Riverside Regional Medical Center. Kelly convinced Vanessa to let her take David and his 2-year-old brother, Frederick, to the event. Vanessa, likely trusting that the woman was who she claimed to be, handed her children over. Tragically, that was the last time she saw David. Later that day, Frederick was found wandering alone at a shopping center near Old Mallory Road in Hampton, Virginia. He had a piece of paper in his pocket with his name and address on it, allowing the police to return him to his mother. However, there was no sign of David. That same afternoon, the phone rang at the Blockett home. Vanessa answered and heard a woman, believed to be the abductor, on the other end of the line. The woman asked what kind of formula David was taking, but she hung up before police could trace the call. This was the last known contact from the mysterious Marie Kelly. Several days later, authorities found a diaper bag and a leather folder near a parkway in Yorktown, Virginia. The items were believed to belong to the abductor and may have provided clues to her identity. The woman known as Marie Kelly has never been identified. Witnesses described her as an African-American woman between 32 and 35 years old, with a medium complexion and large hips. She was approximately 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed between 145 and 155 pounds. A sketch of the woman was created, but despite extensive efforts, investigators never determined her identity. It was later confirmed that the DSS did not employ a social worker named Marie Kelly, nor was there any Christmas party for children planned at Riverside Regional Medical Center. Authorities believe that David may have been targeted after his birth was announced in the local newspaper, a common practice at the time. Just days before David's abduction, the paper had published a list of recent births, including his. Around the same time as David's disappearance, another family in the area was approached by a woman posing as a social worker. The woman asked to see their newborn child, but the mother refused and sent her away. In a chilling twist of fate, more than 30 years after David's kidnapping, two of his nephews were abducted in a separate incident. In June 2011, David's younger brother, Dante, faced a terrifying ordeal when his two sons, ages 5 and 6, were taken by a woman named Summer Pinnell. The children's mother, Yovanda Denise Benefield, had taken the boys to work with her that day. Pinnell, a stranger, asked for a ride to North Carolina. Benefield agreed, trusting Pinnell to take her car and watch the children at a park until her shift ended. Instead, Pinnell took off with the boys. Hours later, the children and Pinnell were found unharmed in Halifax, North Carolina. Pinnell, who had a history of mental illness, was charged with abduction but found not guilty by reason of insanity in January 2012. David's mother, Vanessa Blockett, never saw her son again. Tragically, she died of an aneurysm in 1997 at the age of 35. She never got the answer she so desperately sought. Frederick, now living in North Carolina, has vague memories of the abduction. He recalls being in a car with a man driving and Marie Kelly sitting beside him, neither of whom made eye contact with the children. He remembers the couple dropping him off in Hampton, but what happened to David remains a mystery. Remarkably, investigators still have the diaper bag that David was taken with. It contains items such as David's booties, a blanket, a sweater, jeans, and a comb with hair stuck to it. With advances in DNA technology, investigators hope these items may provide new leads. If the hair or other items yield DNA evidence, it could help identify David or his abductor. Despite the passage of time, David Blockett's case remains unsolved. His disappearance has haunted Newport News for over 40 years. Investigators continue to hold out hope that someone, somewhere, has information that could crack the case. David would be 44 years old today. Anyone with information about his case is urged to contact the Newport News Police Department or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Cheryl Brown was last seen on the evening of September 1, 2023, at her home located at the corner of Hanover and Patterson Streets in Petersburg, Virginia. That day, around 7 p.m., Brown's mother came by to check on her. During their visit, Brown asked her mother if she could take her somewhere, but her mother refused. She was concerned for Brown's health, as she had recently suffered several seizures and was still in a fragile state. Her weakened condition made it risky for her to go out, so her mother encouraged her to stay home and rest. Later that night, sometime after 11 p.m., Brown's husband arrived home. When he pulled up to their residence, he saw Brown sitting outside on the porch with their 11-year-old granddaughter. He exchanged a few words with her before heading inside the house for a short time. He was gone for only about 5 or 10 minutes, but when he returned to the porch, Cheryl was gone. Confused, he asked his granddaughter where she had gone. The young girl told him that Brown said she needed to get some help and that she would be back soon. She had simply stood up, walked away from the house, and disappeared into the night. Brown's husband immediately set out to look for her, searching their neighborhood and calling out her name. He couldn't find any sign of her, but he wasn't overly concerned at first. According to her family, Brown had dropped out of sight before, vanishing for hours or even a day, only to return home safe and sound. Her husband assumed this would be one of those occasions and expected her to show up in the morning. However, when he woke up the next day, there was still no sign of her. By September 4th, with no word from Brown, her family reported her missing to the police. Her granddaughter was the last known person to see her that night. What Brown meant when she told her granddaughter she needed to get help remains unclear. Her family has been left to wonder if she was experiencing a medical crisis when she left the house. Brown had a history of health issues, particularly seizures, which had recently become more frequent and severe. The family worries that her condition may have caused confusion or disorientation, leading her to wander off and possibly get lost or incapacitated. Adding to their concerns, Brown left without taking anything with her. She had no medication, no cellular phone, and no personal belongings. It was as if she had only intended to be gone for a short while. Despite their fears, authorities do not believe foul play was involved in Brown's disappearance. Her family holds out hope that she may be found alive, but they acknowledge that her health issues pose a serious risk. As time has passed without any leads or confirmed sightings, worry has deepened into despair. Her case remains open and unsolved, with little information to guide investigators. For those who loved Cheryl Brown, her sudden and unexplained disappearance has been devastating. They cling to the hope that someone, somewhere, may know what happened to her on that September night. Joan Cook was last seen on the night of January 24, 2010, walking away from her estranged husband's home on Elderwood Road in Salem, Virginia. It was around 11 p.m. when Joan left, supposedly heading to a friend's house. But there's uncertainty about whether she ever made it to her destination. The friend wasn't home that night, and no one saw Joan arrive. Her disappearance has baffled investigators ever since, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and suspicions that linger to this day. Joan's life at the time was complicated, marked by a rocky marriage, a new relationship, and plans for a fresh start that never came to be. Joan and her husband, Mike Cook, had been married for 22 years, but their marriage had been strained for some time. In 2007, Mike moved to Iowa for a job with the intention that Joan and their daughter would eventually join him. But while Mike was away, Joan began seeing another man. When Mike learned of her new relationship, he returned to Virginia, and according to Joan's sister, he didn't take the news well. Although there were no reported threats, Joan's sister claimed that Mike stalked Joan and her boyfriend. Despite the tension, the couple remained in contact, largely because of their daughter. By early 2010, Joan was living with her boyfriend and planning to divorce Mike when she could afford it. The arrangement was somewhat complicated. Every other weekend, when her boyfriend had visitation with his own daughter, Joan would stay at Mike's house with their daughter. It was during one of these visitation weekends, when Joan was staying with Mike, that she disappeared. According to Mike, Joan was acting perfectly normal on the evening of January 24th. She left the house at 11 p.m., and that was the last time anyone saw her. The first clue that something wasn't right came 2 days later, on January 26th, when a text message from Joan's phone was sent to the friend she was supposedly going to see that night. The message, sent at 5 a.m., simply said, "I love you." The strange part? The text wasn't sent from Salem, where Joan lived. Instead, her phone pinged off a tower near the 3rd Salem exit southbound on Interstate 81, suggesting she had traveled some distance before the message was sent. That cryptic text would be the last contact anyone had from Joan. Mike reported her missing 5 days later, on January 31st. Police searched Mike's home, but found no evidence of foul play. Their daughter, who was only 7 years old at the time, told investigators she hadn't heard or seen anything unusual that night. Following Joan's disappearance, Mike took their daughter and moved back to Iowa. Joan's boyfriend, who had been out of town visiting his own daughter that weekend, was quickly ruled out as a suspect. What makes Joan's disappearance particularly troubling is how uncharacteristic it was for her to leave without a word, especially abandoning her young daughter. She was devoted to her child, and her sudden absence raised immediate concerns among those who knew her best. When she left that night, she took a few personal items with her: a purse, wallet, house keys, a green duffel bag containing clothes and makeup, and a beige toiletries bag. But after she vanished, her cell phone went silent and her bank accounts were never touched again. The investigation into Joan's disappearance has been slow and frustrating. Authorities have long believed that someone close to Joan knows what happened to her, but no one has come forward with critical information. Her case remains classified as suspicious, and police have not ruled out foul play. The Roanoke County Police Department continues to investigate, but more than a decade later, the mystery of Joan Cook's disappearance remains unsolved. Joan's family and friends have struggled for years with the uncertainty of what happened that night in January 2010. Her daughter, who was just a child when Joan vanished, has grown up without answers. Melissa Brannon's disappearance remains one of Virginia's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a tragic case that continues to devastate her family and baffle investigators. On December 3, 1989, 5-year-old Melissa was attending a holiday party at the Woodside Apartment Clubhouse in Lorton, Virginia, with her mother, Tammy Brannon. The party was a festive event, packed with about 80 guests, including other families and children from the apartment complex where Melissa and her mother lived. Around 10 p.m., as the evening wound down, Tammy prepared to leave with her daughter. Melissa, however, wanted one last snack before they left and ran off to grab some potato chips. That brief moment would change everything. Melissa vanished from the clubhouse and was never seen again. Panic quickly set in as partygoers realized the little girl was missing. The search began immediately, but there was no sign of Melissa. Among the attendees that night was Caleb Daniel Hughes, a 24-year-old groundskeeper who had only been employed at the Woodside Apartments for a couple of weeks. Hughes had a checkered past, but his prior offenses were not related to violent or sexual crimes. Despite this, Hughes quickly became a prime suspect. He had been seen sitting near Melissa at the party shortly before she vanished, and he left the event around the same time Melissa was discovered missing. His sudden departure and his presence near the child raised red flags with law enforcement. Authorities searched for Hughes and finally tracked him down around 1 a.m. the next morning. When police found him, they immediately noticed something suspicious. Hughes had already washed the clothes he wore to the party. This strange behavior further fueled investigators' suspicions, and the FBI wasted no time collecting evidence. They took samples of blood, hair, and fibers from Hughes's maroon Honda for forensic testing, hoping to find any trace of Melissa. The forensic results were both promising and frustrating. Rabbit hairs found in Hughes's car were a direct match to Melissa's rabbit fur jacket, suggesting she had been in his vehicle at some point. Additionally, blue fibers found in the car matched Melissa's sweater, and red fibers were consistent with her red plaid skirt. However, while there were bloodstains found on tissues inside the car, the initial tests indicated that up to 40% of the population could have been the source of the blood. Further testing eventually ruled out Melissa as the source of those stains, leaving investigators without the concrete DNA evidence they needed to solidify their case. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the circumstantial evidence against Hughes continued to build. Prosecutors argued that his actions, leaving the party abruptly, washing his clothes immediately after, and having fibers from Melissa's clothing and rabbit fur jacket in his car, pointed to his involvement in her disappearance. In 1991, Hughes was convicted of abducting Melissa with the intent to defile and sentenced to 50 years in prison. The conviction gave Melissa's family some sense of justice, but their hearts remained broken. Melissa was still missing, and no one knew what had happened to her. Hughes has always maintained his innocence in the case, insisting he had nothing to do with Melissa's disappearance. While incarcerated, he was considered a model prisoner, earning good behavior credits that reduced his sentence. In a decision that outraged Melissa's family and community members, Hughes was released from prison in August 2019 after serving just 29 years of his 50-year sentence. The mystery of Melissa's disappearance has only deepened in the decades since she went missing. In a bizarre twist, 2 other men, unrelated to Hughes, were convicted of attempting to extort ransom money from Tammy Brannon in the wake of her daughter's disappearance. These individuals were not involved in Melissa's abduction, but saw her family's heartbreak as an opportunity to exploit them for financial gain. Over the years, authorities and Melissa's loved ones have not given up hope of solving the case. Foul play is strongly suspected, given the circumstances of her disappearance and the forensic evidence found in Hughes's car. Yet, without Melissa's remains or a direct confession, the case remains unsolved. Her mother, Tammy, has tirelessly campaigned to keep Melissa's memory alive and ensure her story is not forgotten. To this day, Melissa Brannon's fate remains a chilling mystery. She was a bright, vibrant little girl with her whole life ahead of her, and her sudden disappearance shattered her family and community. Although Hughes has served his time and is now a free man, questions about his involvement continue to linger. Investigators, family, and the public are left wondering, where is Melissa? What really happened that night in December 1989? Melissa Brannan's disappearance remains one of Virginia's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a tragic case that continues to devastate her family and baffle investigators. On December 3, 1989, 5-year-old Melissa was attending a holiday party at the Woodside Apartment Clubhouse in Lorton, Virginia, with her mother, Tammy Brannan. The party was a festive event, packed with about 80 guests, including other families and children from the apartment complex where Melissa and her mother lived. Around 10 p.m., as the evening wound down, Tammy prepared to leave with her daughter. Melissa, however, wanted one last snack before they left and ran off to grab some potato chips. That brief moment would change everything. Melissa vanished from the clubhouse and was never seen again. Panic quickly set in as partygoers realized the little girl was missing. The search began immediately, but there was no sign of Melissa. Among the attendees that night was Caleb Daniel Hughes, a 24-year-old groundskeeper who had only been employed at the Woodside Apartments for a couple of weeks. Hughes had a checkered past, but his prior offenses were not related to violent or sexual crimes. Despite this, Hughes quickly became a prime suspect. He had been seen sitting near Melissa at the party shortly before she vanished, and he left the event around the same time Melissa was discovered missing. His sudden departure and his presence near the child raised red flags with law enforcement. Authorities searched for Hughes and finally tracked him down around 1 a.m. the next morning. When police found him, they immediately noticed something suspicious. Hughes had already washed the clothes he wore to the party. This strange behavior further fueled investigators' suspicions, and the FBI wasted no time collecting evidence. They took samples of blood, hair, and fibers from Hughes's maroon Honda for forensic testing, hoping to find any trace of Melissa. The forensic results were both promising and frustrating. Rabbit hairs found in Hughes's car were a direct match to Melissa's rabbit fur jacket, suggesting she had been in his vehicle at some point. Additionally, blue fibers found in the car matched Melissa's sweater, and red fibers were consistent with her red plaid skirt. However, while there were bloodstains found on tissues inside the car, the initial tests indicated that up to 40% of the population could have been the source of the blood. Further testing eventually ruled out Melissa as the source of those stains, leaving investigators without the concrete DNA evidence they needed to solidify their case. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the circumstantial evidence against Hughes continued to build. Prosecutors argued that his actions, leaving the party abruptly, washing his clothes immediately after, and having fibers from Melissa's clothing and rabbit fur jacket in his car, pointed to his involvement in her disappearance. In 1991, Hughes was convicted of abducting Melissa with the intent to defile and sentenced to 50 years in prison. The conviction gave Melissa's family some sense of justice, but their hearts remained broken. Melissa was still missing, and no one knew what had happened to her. Hughes has always maintained his innocence in the case, insisting he had nothing to do with Melissa's disappearance. While incarcerated, he was considered a model prisoner, earning good behavior credits that reduced his sentence. In a decision that outraged Melissa's family and community members, Hughes was released from prison in August 2019 after serving just 29 years of his 50-year sentence. The mystery of Melissa's disappearance has only deepened in the decades since she went missing. In a bizarre twist, 2 other men, unrelated to Hughes, were convicted of attempting to extort ransom money from Tammy Brannan in the wake of her daughter's disappearance. These individuals were not involved in Melissa's abduction, but saw her family's heartbreak as an opportunity to exploit them for financial gain. Over the years, authorities and Melissa's loved ones have not given up hope of solving the case. Foul play is strongly suspected, given the circumstances of her disappearance and the forensic evidence found in Hughes's car. Yet, without Melissa's remains or a direct confession, the case remains unsolved. Her mother, Tammy, has tirelessly campaigned to keep Melissa's memory alive and ensure her story is not forgotten. To this day, Melissa Brannan's fate remains a chilling mystery. She was a bright, vibrant little girl with her whole life ahead of her, and her sudden disappearance shattered her family and community. Although Hughes has served his time and is now a free man, questions about his involvement continue to linger. Investigators, family, and the public are left wondering, where is Melissa? What really happened that night in December 1989? Richard Call went on a date with Cassandra Haley on April 9, 1988. He picked her up at her Grafton, Virginia home, and they planned to spend the day together. The couple traveled in Call's red 1982 Toyota Celica. It was their first date together, and Call's first since breaking up with his girlfriend of nearly 4 years. They were last seen at a party in Newport News, Virginia, at 1:30 a.m. on April 10th, but neither of them has been seen again. Call's vehicle was discovered abandoned at the York River overlook on Colonial Parkway in Yorktown, Virginia at 7 a.m. on April 10th, but it was not reported to authorities until 9 o'clock a.m. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed. The keys were on the driver's seat, and a watch and eyeglasses were on the dashboard. Nearly all of the clothing Call was wearing, including his underwear, was found in the back of the car, as were some of Haley's clothes and her underwear. Her purse and Call's wallet were missing, and the wallet had contained at least $20 in cash. There was no trace of Haley or Call at the overlook. Authorities initially believed they had gone swimming and drowned, but an extensive search of the river turned up no sign of them. The water temperature was in the 40s the night of their disappearances, and Haley was afraid of the water. Foul play is now suspected in both their cases. The bodies of 3 other young couples, all of them college students, were found in areas located off the Colonial Parkway from 1986 through 1989. In all cases, their cars were found abandoned with most of their possessions intact inside, but only Haley and Call's bodies have never been found. The Colonial Parkway extends for 23 miles and runs through the Virginia cities of Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown. Authorities have long suspected that a serial killer stalked and killed in that region in the mid to late 1980s. They believe the perpetrator may have impersonated a law enforcement officer in order to approach his victims. Both Call and Haley were students at Christopher Newport College, now called Christopher Newport University, in 1988. Their cases remain unsolved.